Welcome to Behind the Title, the official podcast of Trilogy and Baldacci Real Estate Closing Services. I'm one of your hosts, Bobbie Grenier, and unfortunately, Jessica Mung is not able to join us today, but I promise she will be back for future episodes. So here is my question for you. Have you ever thought of buying a tax-acquired property? Or maybe you're a real estate agent that is considered working with towns to list properties for sale. If that is you, then this is the episode that you need to listen to. I have invited Zachary Greenfield, Underwriter and State Counsel for Stewart Title Guaranty Company, and he is here to fill us in on everything we need to know about working with tax-acquired properties. Hey, Zach, welcome. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, Bobbie. Good to see you.
You too. So you came into our office here in Bangor. Oh gosh, it was maybe 6 months or so ago, and you gave us a great talk on tax-acquired property. And we work with this every day, and I learned a lot on that talk. So I just thought this would be really valuable information for our listeners, which are primary real estate agents. So I appreciate you coming in and smartening us all up on this.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here. It's not the most exciting subject matter, but it is pretty important because it comes up a decent amount these days.
It sure does. Before we jump into that subject, I know everybody wants to know more about you.
Zachary Greenfield. I go by Zach. I right now am the state counsel and underwriter for Stewart Title Guaranty Company, which is one of the 4 or 5 big title insurance companies in the country. My job essentially involves helping our title agents with title issues. You come across some weird title lien or some kind of bizarre situation that you haven't seen before. My job is to work through that puzzle with you, help you put the pieces together so you guys can get to a closing.
You have no idea how much we appreciate that part.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's actually kind of fun to fix problems, especially when they're not your own problem. So why don't I go back? I went to law school about 25 years ago at the University of Maine School of Law. When I got out of law school, I worked for a law firm in Portland, Maine for a number of years. I did a variety of different things, found myself in court doing civil litigation. I did a lot of real estate transactions. I did some bankruptcy work. I did some estate planning and probate. I did some foreclosures. So I have sort of a well-rounded understanding of all of those areas, and they all come into play with real estate transactions, as you know. Just knowing real estate law is not enough as a real estate practitioner. So I jokingly tell people this job with Stewart is the first job I've ever actually been qualified for. And it's funny, I didn't plan it this way, but the first 20 years of my practice really prepared me to be helpful in this position. I also did some real estate development work myself. I was never a broker, but I did do a subdivision. I flipped a bunch of houses. So I've seen this industry from different sides of the table, and I think I have a pretty well-rounded base of knowledge and can be helpful to our issuing agents. Right now, I am just doing the work for Stewart, not really doing any private practice work, but Stewart was kind enough to let me teach the real estate transactions course at the University of Maine School of Law. So I'm into my second semester of teaching there, and I really, really enjoy teaching real estate transactions. Again, it's an area that I actually know. I think it's a great class because we touch on all of those different areas of the law, including tax titles.
It's really interesting because a lot of times, and it's probably the same thing for you, when I meet people and they ask what I do and I say I'm a real estate paralegal, and they kind of glaze over like, that sounds really boring, that you just are in the registry of deeds and doing grantor grantee work. And I have worked for Trilogy for, it'll be 23 years in May. We see new stuff all the time. It's really not boring, and it's a lot of, if you like to solve puzzles and figure things out, which I do, it's really an interesting field. You clearly have a view from all different sides, which is really helpful and helpful to us as agents.
It's a great field. You get to work in your community. You get to know the buyers and the sellers and the brokers, and you're helping everybody get to the same finish line. It's the same finish line they all want, right? We're not fighting to see who's going to win. They come to us and they say, we want to sell this property for this much to this person, make it happen. And we work through the issues and everybody's happy and goes their own way most of the time.
There's always a way to figure most things out. Sometimes it's a little more of a curvy road to get there. Sometimes it's very straightforward, but 9 times out of 10, things can definitely be figured out if all the parties really, like you said, want to get to that end result, which is the closing table.
That's right. And we do want to get to the closing table. Sometimes the title insurance underwriter is seen as the party in the transaction that holds things up, right? If there's an issue and the underwriter doesn't like it, I can understand from a broker's perspective how that would be frustrating, but I think it's important to understand that we get paid if the deal closes. We don't get paid if it doesn't. So our goal is the same as everybody else at the table. It's to get to a closing. We just have to make sure that it's done right so that when the parties go off on their own way, they don't have any reason to get into a fight later over something that someone missed.
You know what that perception might come from? I was just thinking about it as you were speaking. A lot of times we handle things, well, let's talk to Zach. Let's see if we can get some underwriting coverage for this. And so we get the underwriting coverage and we just go along our way and we don't make an issue that there's any kind of problem because it's insurable. It's covered by underwriting. But when there is an issue, that's when they a lot of times hear the word underwriter. So I wonder if that's what it is. So we need to start plugging you all when you're giving us a thumbs up and allowing us to insure over smaller issues.
That's a great point, right? It's kind of like the dentist. Very few people go see the dentist when their teeth are in good shape, right? You only call the underwriter when there's a problem. But in the background, we are solving a lot of problems that never rise to the surface.
So why I've asked you to come on the podcast today is to talk about tax titles and some of the recent changes around tax titles. But before we get there, I want to step it back and start at the very beginning so that you can give a brief explanation of what a tax title actually is.
But let's start way back in the beginning. In Maine, as in many states, real estate taxes are assessed and collected by municipalities. Some states, counties do it, but in Maine, the towns do it. And in my opinion, real estate taxes are the most important tax to our society. They pay for police officers, fire departments, teachers, and keeping the roads in good shape. It's a really important flow of income for municipalities. And without that, our towns end up in some kind of chaotic form. So because real estate taxes are so important to the functioning of our towns, the law treats them very specially. If a property owner fails to pay their real estate taxes, state law gives the municipality a lien against the real estate to secure payment. And sometimes we call that lien the super lien. It beats every other kind of lien. So the general rule in real estate is first in time, first in right. Okay, that's the general rule. You record something in the registry of deeds before somebody else does, you win, right? But that's not the case when it comes to municipal real estate tax liens. A municipal real estate tax lien beats everything. A mortgage that was recorded before it gets wiped out by the municipal real estate tax lien if that gets foreclosed. All other interests fall in line behind the municipal real estate tax lien in the registry of deeds. So the statute that creates this lien, it runs through a series of requirements that the towns must meet in order to create that lien and enforce that lien. Just jumping for a second to the end, if a town has a proper lien and enforces it through the automatic foreclosure process, what happens is title to the property changes hands automatically. There's no judicial action involved. So homeowners can lose their property rights without any judicial intervention based on this statute. And for that reason, courts have said that the municipalities have to comply with the statute very closely. They can't do anything wrong, right? We don't want, our Constitution essentially guarantees that you won't lose rights unless the process that's required is followed. And in this context, the town has to follow the process very closely. That process, and I'll summarize it, the taxes get committed by the town. The taxes then get assessed, essentially means billed. If somebody fails to pay the tax, the town has to send out essentially what's a notice of default and right to cure letter. Town sends a letter out, says, you fail to pay your last tax bill, you have 30 days to do so, or the town is going to put a lien in the registry of deeds. If by day 40, the homeowner has not cured that default, the town will record a lien certificate in the registry of deeds. And the statute says that that lien certificate, it's essentially a mortgage with superpowers that will automatically foreclose after the passage of time if the taxes aren't paid. So the timing from the date that the lien is recorded in the registry until the date that it automatically forecloses and the homeowner loses their property is 18 months. So once that gets recorded in the registry, you have 18 months to pay it off. Or if the town takes the next step and does their job right, you will automatically lose your property. Now, that next step is the really important. That is a notice from the town that's sent approximately 30 days before the end of the 18-month period. And that notice is called, in most cases, a notice of automatic impending foreclosure. So the town gives you one last chance. They say, in about 30 days, nothing else is going to happen. We're not going to come out there. We're not going to file a lawsuit. We're not going to say another word. But in about 30 days, you're automatically going to lose title to your property if you don't pay the lien. And that's what happens. So at that point, the town owns the property if you haven't paid. At that 18-month mark, if they've sent all the required notices, the town automatically owns the property. Now, the big question becomes, does that mean the town can then sell it? Yeah, the town can sell it, but will the buyer have marketable title? That is the real complicating factor in municipal tax liens and what we call tax titles. The statute says that even though the town has title to the property, for 5 years after the date of automatic foreclosure, the delinquent taxpayer has the right to challenge the foreclosure in court. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to win the challenge, but it's like a statute of limitations. If they wait longer than 5 years, they lose the right to file a lawsuit to challenge the taking. It's really a taking by the municipality. So for that reason, during that 5-year period, we've always taken the position that titles, tax titles, are not marketable and not insurable, because we don't know if somebody's going to show up and file a lawsuit. We don't know if the heir of the person who lost the property to the tax lien foreclosure is going to show up. So nobody's been willing to insure those properties to a buyer during that 5-year period. Most brokers didn't want to touch those. They didn't want to work for the town to try to sell those properties, because any real estate lawyer will say to the buyer, you're not really getting good title. You have the risk for 5 years if somebody's going to show up and file a lawsuit and you're going to lose your title. Now, that's all sort of changed. And the impetus for the change was this kind of interesting lawsuit that made it to the United States Supreme Court. The case was called Tyler versus Hennepin County. In that particular state, the counties assess real estate taxes and have the rights that in Maine, the municipalities have. So, this is Tyler owned property in Hennepin County, and she got sick. She ended up in the hospital. She didn't pay the real estate taxes, and it wasn't a lot of money. It was something like $2,500. The time period passed. The automatic foreclosure happened. The county sold the property for something like $40,000. Now, mind you, she only owed the county $2,500. County sells the property, let's say, for $40,000. They keep the whole $40,000. Mrs. Tyler gets out of the hospital and she files a lawsuit. And she says, you owe me the difference between the $2,500 in taxes and the 40 grand that you got from the sale. And the county said, sorry, we get to keep all of the money. Now, when I read these facts, I initially thought, that's crazy. Why would the county think that it can keep more than it was owed? Right? In a foreclosure of a mortgage, when a bank forecloses, the bank only gets to keep what it's owed. Any surplus at that auction sale has to go to whoever's next in line. And if there are no other liens, and the person next in line was the owner that got foreclosed on. So the trial court agrees with the county. This case eventually makes it to the United States Supreme Court, which is rare because, a local tax and real estate case rarely makes it to the United States Supreme Court, but it did in 2023. And the United States Supreme Court said, no, the county cannot keep what it's not owed. So that sent a message to every state, every county, every town to look at the way you handle tax lien foreclosures and make sure you're not going to violate the rule established in this new case. So Maine's legislature looked at all the rules and they said, you know what? We don't think our statute necessarily violates the rule in this case because our statute doesn't say the town can keep the surplus, but it doesn't say it can't. So we're gonna add some stuff to our statute. And what they did was they essentially said in the new law, when a town forecloses on a tax lien and goes to sell the property, it has to hire a broker. It has to market the property in a commercially reasonable manner, has to try to get good offers for the property. And if it does, after it sells the property, it has to give the surplus back to whoever's next in line. And in most cases, that's the homeowner who lost the property. Now, what's changed in the statute that helps us in the real estate transaction world is that if the town does all of this and distributes the surplus to the delinquent taxpayer, the 5-year statute of limitations automatically ends when the town records a notice in the registry of deeds saying that it did everything right and it gave the surplus back to the taxpayer. So that theoretically makes these titles marketable way earlier than 5 years. And in some cases, if the town lists the property for sale, as soon as that 18-month redemption period has expired and the foreclosure is effective, you can have a marketable property almost immediately if the town does everything right. So for that reason, I think the brokers that you work with are probably seeing a lot more activity from towns trying to sell these tax acquired parcels.
So yeah, we are seeing that, and it was probably a year or so ago. I think by the time everybody caught up and towns started reaching out to real estate agents said, hey, this is a whole new avenue for me. This is a whole new book of business that I can do to market these properties that have become tax acquired. But as a practical matter, our experience has been that Mary, that's worked at the town office for 15 years, still wants to do it the old way. We've had some push and pull with the towns trying to take their old way and make it work with this new format, with working with a real estate agent, with working with a title company, even to the point that we had towns that were adamant that they were going to record the deed.
Yeah, it's going to be a very slow process to get everyone on board with this new system. And we've seen a lot of transactions come through where there's been a lot of hair pulling, and a lot of it is trying to educate the towns on how the new statute works. Also educate brokers so they know whether or not they want to get involved with one of these, because it's a lot of work. Even though there's more opportunity now for these properties to be sold, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of hand-holding, and they're fairly complicated transactions, often without big sale prices.
I would agree with that. So you said if the town does everything correctly. That, in my experience, is a huge if. If they don't do it correctly, they don't take all the steps that are required by statute, is there a fix by the time it gets to Trowigi and Baldacci and we're doing our title and everybody thinks that this is going to be an insurable, marketable title?
Well, so I look at it as being two steps now. The first step is, did the town do everything right up to the foreclosure? And then did the town do everything right after the foreclosure? So if we look first at the first step, we essentially need to see the notice of automatic impending foreclosure. That's the notice that the town has to send between 30 and 45 days before the end of the 18-month redemption. We have to make sure that they sent it to the right person, right? Did they send it to the right owner of the property? Did they draft it properly? And did they have proof of mailing? They send them by certified mail. In most cases, the town is doing that part right. They've been doing that for years and years and years. And in most cases, they do it right. So we look at that. And if we give that a thumbs up, we move on to the second step. What we want to see now is, did the town send the notice to the delinquent taxpayer that's required under the statute, which says, we've listed your property with a real estate agent, you will be entitled to the surplus. Okay, great. If they've done that, we're in good shape still. The real complicating factor is that the 5-year statute of limitations, that 5-year period when the property is not marketed, that doesn't end early until the town signs an affidavit saying that they sent the surplus to the delinquent taxpayer, and they record that in the registry of deeds. Now, towns want to do that after the closing. They want to have a closing where they sign a deed, they give it to Georgie and Baldacci, you record it, you send the town all of the money, and then the town distributes the surplus. And then the town wants to record that affidavit in the registry of deeds. Now, we lose control at that point, right? If that's not all being done at the closing table, we lose control. We don't know that it's ever going to happen. We don't have any mechanism to force the town to send the surplus out and to put that affidavit on record. So with some towns, we're getting a level of trust. I had an agent that had one of these transactions with the city of Gardner, and they did everything really well. I was very impressed. The city of Gardner was very professional about it. They gave us drafts of all of these documents. There have been some other towns, and I won't mention them, and like you said, they're resistant to doing it our way. So those become very hard to close on, right? Now, if you have a buyer that isn't looking to flip the property, it takes some pressure off, right? Because maybe the buyer just going to put a tenant in there for 5 years, and then they'll flip it once that 5 years has run out. But if they want to do something with the property, if they want to get a construction loan or a mortgage, this 5-year period has to end. And it only ends if 5 years run, or if the town sends out the surplus and records the affidavit. There is one other way that the 5-year period can be shortened that I skipped over, and it's new. It's a couple of years old. After we had lots of foreclosures after the crisis in 2008, there were lots of properties that were just sitting vacant, and they became abandoned. So the state said, okay, we're going to change the statute so that if the town can establish that a property that they foreclosed on has been abandoned, that 5-year period will be shrunk down to, I believe it's 90 days, but it does shrink that 5 years down. But that's not the big one. The big one is sending the surplus money to the delinquent taxpayer. That's the main mechanism right now in the statute that complies with the United States Supreme Court decision in Tyler versus Hennepin, and also ends that 5-year period and allows these properties to come market. In my opinion, the town should come to the closing table just like a seller would, and they should let you at Georgie and Baldacci send the surplus out, have the town sign the affidavit at the closing table, you put it on record, you suddenly have a marketable and insurable property. I think we'll get there, but it's going to take some time.
Kind of a sticky way to do this, and we've had a little bit of success with this, is asking the party or parties that lost the property due to unpaid taxes to release.
That is exactly right, Bobbie. This 5-year period it's a right that the delinquent taxpayer holds. They can waive it. So if you can get that person to the closing table, have them sign a release of that right, this all fixes itself. Now, that used to be a really hard thing to do because a lot of towns didn't think they had to give any of the surplus money to the delinquent taxpayer. You now have a very different situation. You have the United States Supreme Court saying to the town, the surplus is going to the delinquent taxpayer. So if I were a real estate broker and I wanted to take one of these on, I would be trying to get in touch with the delinquent taxpayer. And I'd be explaining to them that I've seen the title report. There are no other liens. You are going to get a check, but we need you to cooperate. We need you to come to our office, sign a waiver of this right to challenge.
Let's talk about other liens. If there are other liens on the property, be it a mortgage or a writ or a mechanic's lien, what have you, how does that work?
When we talk about other liens in the context of municipal real estate tax lien foreclosures, there are really two categories. There are mortgages and then there are liens. The statute treats them different. The statute says that a mortgage holder is entitled to all the same notices that the property owner was entitled to. And there's good reason for that. Maine is what we call a title theory state for mortgages. When you sign a mortgage and give it to the bank, you're transferring title to your property to the bank, subject to two rights. You're keeping two rights. You've given all the rights to the property to the bank. You've only kept the right of possession. So you have the right to be there, and you have the right of redemption, which is the right to pay the bank off and get all the other rights back. So for that reason, the statute says that all of the notices that have to go to the delinquent taxpayer have to go to the mortgage holder as well. So when we're underwriting one of these and we're looking at the first step, which is making sure the town did everything pre-foreclosure right, we want to see that the town sent the notice of impending automatic foreclosure, not only to the taxpayer, but to any mortgage holders. And if it didn't, well, we're done. The deal is dead in its place. The town needs to then send those notices and start the clock ticking again. So, but when we talk about liens, there's a little gray area. The statute does not say that the town is required to send the notice of automatic impending foreclosure to a writ holder, someone who has a judgment lien, for example. They don't have title to the property. They just have a lien against the property, which is different than a mortgage. Those will get wiped out by the foreclosure, whether or not the town sent a notice to the writ holder. Some towns do, just to keep everybody on notice.
Can we take a step back? We've used the term insurability, marketability. Can you give us just really a brief explanation as to what that is and why should a buyer care?
Great question. So marketability is usually defined as the status of title that a willing buyer would accept from a willing seller. So in other words, a marketable title is a title to property with no problems. Now, there are always going to be some encumbrances on title, and they don't all render title unmarketable. For example, the owner of the property may have given an easement to Central Maine Power Company for a pole on the property. That's an encumbrance on the title, but that does not render title unmarketable. But if there is a mortgage that has not been paid off, that's unmarketable title, but the seller has the right to render title marketable at the closing table with the proceeds of the sale, so they can pay off that mortgage. A classic example of property that's not marketable is if a neighbor has recorded something in the registry of deeds saying, I claim that I own a piece of your property. Well, no willing buyer is going to pay a willing seller to buy that property and essentially buy that lawsuit against the neighbor. So that would be an unmarketable title. There are also other little defects in the chain of title that can technically render a title unmarketable, but we may be willing to insure it because we think that the risk of that issue coming up ever is so tiny that we consider it a technical issue.
I feel like people miss the insurance piece when we talk about title insurance, that it is all about assessing risk. So to bring that full circle back to a tax title, your view is the risk is very high, or not a risk that a title insurance underwriter would be willing to take to insure a property that that 5-year redemption period is still standing.
Yeah, the risk in those cases is what we call the risk of a total loss of title. It's not like we would just have to pay somebody $1,000 to go away. We might have a situation where if the delinquent taxpayer files a lawsuit and wins, our insured, the party that we insured is the buyer, ends up having no title rights whatsoever. They got nothing. So we're very careful about insuring tax titles if they're not done perfectly.
I'd love to have you give a key takeaway to a buyer. So if somebody is looking at a tax acquired property, it seems like a really great deal, what would your advice be? Would you caution them on anything?
I think what a buyer of a tax title property needs to think about is, what do they want to do with the property? If they want to immediately get a construction loan, fix it up and flip it, they need to be very cautious, and they need to have a title company that's very cautious and make sure everything is done perfectly so they have good title. If, however, that buyer just wants to put a tenant in the property for years, well, I would be willing to take more risk if I were that buyer. I would still want to know that things were done right. I'd still ideally want a title insurance policy, but I would be less concerned about making sure everything was absolutely perfect. And if you take that one step further, there are buyers out there who understand all of these risks, know that they won't necessarily be able to sell the property right away, get a construction mortgage loan against it, but they think that the price is low enough that if they buy this thing and they sit on it for long enough until the title is actually marketable, they will do very well. It's all about mindset. You have to think as a buyer, what do I want to do with this property? That will inform how much you're willing to pay for a tax title property, how much legwork has to go into finding the delinquent taxpayer, for example, or making sure the town cooperates and shows up at the closing table and signs everything to sign.
And let's talk to real estate agents for a minute. If you had a room of real estate agents in front of you and you had to give them some practical advice in getting involved in these types of transactions, what would that be?
It's tough for real estate agents because time is a finite resource, and that's really all they have, right? There are great brokers who will work really hard for months to market a property and then find out at the last minute that there's some title defect and the deal never closes, and they've just worked really hard and have nothing to show for it. I would caution brokers to make sure they understand this process. They understand that getting to a closing table could be challenging. And I would have them make sure that any buyer they spend time with understands what's at stake. Right? Because if they find a buyer and the buyer isn't educated on what this all means, well, they may end up never getting to the closing table with that particular buyer. So I think real estate brokers should establish good relationships with people like you so that they can reach out to you and have you walk through what handling one of these listings will look like. They can even reach out to me. We're always happy to talk people through this stuff because the worst thing they can do is spin their wheels for months and months.
Definitely. And it's not a great thing when real estate agents don't understand the process because they've maybe oversimplified it or they're wishing it was going to be a smoother transaction. I think in everything you've said, the stars really need to align for this to not be a time-consuming and complicated transaction. It can happen. We've done it successfully. I know other title companies have done it successfully, and I think that it will get easier as towns catch up, as attorneys catch up to the new way of doing things, and everybody starts working together a little better, and we're not doing sort of this push-pull thing between the towns and the real estate agents and the buyers and maybe the delinquent taxpayers if they're involved too. So I'm hopeful that things will improve, but we really all need to learn and educate ourselves in this area.
It's all about education and being informed on how this all works. That's how we all will do well. And that's one of the reasons I'm going all over the state talking to people.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. I'm going to share your information. I'm going to get some resources from you and share those in the episode description as well so that people can look further into this. And I mean, it could be a niche thing for a real estate agent if they really take the time to learn about it and be able to handle these transactions knowing full well what they're going into and what their buyer is going into.
It sure could. Somebody who wanted to take this on and become an expert at it, they would have endless listing.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks again, Zach.
Okay, Bobbie, take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Behind the Title, the official podcast of Trilogy and Baldacci Real Estate Closing Services with your hosts, Bobbie Grenier and Jessica Mung. Remember, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and not intended as legal advice. Please remember to follow and rate the show and share this episode with a friend.